It's time for Tab Talks, your weekly conversation about matters of faith. I'm your host, Jennifer Rash.
And I'm your co-host, Debbie Campbell.
We're going to talk about conversations today and how to have calm conversations and process and think. And so we brought in the young adult staff members from Tab Media, or some of them anyway. We looked for our 20-somethings, and we have Jessica Ingram, Hannah Muñoz, and Myriah Synder. Jessica is our event coordinator. Hannah is our digital editor, and Myriah helps us with digital storytelling, but works full-time with Georgia Baptist over with our sister media ministry group there at the Christian Index. So welcome, you guys. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Well, just a fun note, Hannah is the one who takes all of these Tab Talks every week and puts them together to produce them. So now you see the face behind the actual work. You know, Debbie and I get the easy part, right?
Hannah has to try to make it all fit together.
Right. So we got some brilliant minds here in our 20s. Crazy enough, Debbie and I started with Tab Media as long ago as they are old, but we're not going to go there. So we will just start with you guys. But what we've, right now, conversations are interesting. Anywhere we go, phone calls, Zoom calls, in person, the little bit that we get to do that now, it seems like we can't get away from the intensity of the conversations happening about what's happening in the world, what's happening in the nation, the unrest, it might be COVID-19, it might be whether to wear a mask or not wear a mask, all of the different topics. They're so heavy and intense and even political. Almost everything turns political. And so we were curious about what this is like for a younger believer trying to apply all of this in process. The ones of us who've been around a while have gone through lots of different experiences, and we've seen pain, we've seen difficulties, and we can apply some of what's happening a little differently. But I'm curious to learn from the ones who are walking into this now. So again, thank you, the three of you, for just being willing to share and talk through this. And so I'd like to just start with each of you taking a turn, just sharing what has been, maybe just use 2020. What's 2020 been like for your thought processes and how you're trying to just absorb and understand what's happening?
Who wants to go first?
How about Jessica? Let's go with Jessica.
Okay, I'll start. 2020 has been, as many would say, a roller coaster. As someone that suffers from anxiety, I wouldn't say it's been great, but it has in some way been a blessing, because I've kind of had to I was forced to deal with some of my anxieties and kind of lean more on scripture and lean more into my faith and not be so overwhelmed and consumed with like the worldly crises that we're having. So many, everything, it seems like everything is some sort of crisis in some way or another. It's the end all, it's the end of the world, it's, the end of life as we know it. And so it's been a really good learning opportunity for me to be able to realize that, like, regardless of how everything might seem, like, we serve a sovereign God who is in control, and he knew back before I was born that this was going to happen in 2020. And so I shouldn't let myself get dragged into the chaos of it just because I'm scared. Because when you're a Christian, we have the hope and peace of God. So
how about you, Myriah?
Yeah, I think one word for 2020 is exhausting. I am just exhausted. And I think definitely mentally, you talked about how we're making everything so political. And we're missing the point of all of it, whether it be the COVID-19 or just the racial tension. Like, if this doesn't transcend our political parties, then we are missing the point of all the conversation. So I think, like, as I'm having conversations about this, what I do is remember not to come at it from my preconceived notions. So whether that be, oh man, I really don't want to wear a mask here, whether that be the fact that I'm coming at it from being biracial, is just realizing that it's transcending whatever my preconceived opinion is. And so I have to be open-minded and open-hearted as I'm having these conversations, understanding that I'm going to have to give as much grace as I'm receiving as I have each of these conversations about all of these things. And I think also just learning like to step away from them whenever I need to. So whether it be like on vacation, we had a rule, like we're not talking about any of this. Like we know that it's here. We'll talk about it, like sit down, have a family meeting before vacation, and then we're done. Because giving some space to just be normal and try to have a normal 2020, like that's okay, I think. And it's okay to take a breath, because I'm not in control of it. Like she said, God is sovereign. So I'm responsible for my own thoughts and my actions, but I don't get to control what the world is thinking and what the world is doing. So giving myself room to take a breath and step away.
Hannah?
Yes, it's been really interesting. Kind of like Jessica said, it's definitely been a roller coaster. There's been some bad things that have obviously been going on, but it's also been nice to, because I've been working from home, I've actually been able to go home to Tennessee and see family. I've been able to go to Texas and see family. One of the things that we started doing really as a family was everybody calls a grandparent each week.
Oh,
It's kind of up to you. I have a lot of grandparents. My mom's parents are divorced, so I've got like a double set on one side. So there's always somebody to call, and it was something that I had been struggling with in the past, just like trying to find time to call, because I've got some grandparents who can keep on going for a few hours on the phone. So it's been nice to, as bad as it sounds, but to have to call. But I get to speak with them and to make sure that they're all doing all right. A few we had to kind of convince to stay inside for a little while. So that has been a positive thing. Another thing that I've kind of taken as a weird sort of positive, in the past, I stopped watching the news. I still read the Alabama Baptist,
thank
obviously. Yes. But I stopped watching the news. I ignored the news that I would see on Facebook, and this has made me more invested in the news.
you.
There's still things that I don't love. I don't like how political the news is, which is why I stopped watching it in the first place. But I realized I needed to know what was going on. I needed to know if they were going to start making us wear masks so that I could be prepared for that. And yeah, just the climate of everything going on. So now I'm back to watching the news, and I think it's really important to be informed. And the Alabama Baptist is great and is super informing, but I think you need a few sources of news too to get a good balance of everything.
Well, and on that point, we do have a kind of a select customized audience that we work toward, and we have a purpose that's beyond
Right.
just the latest current events. So you're right. We do, it's responsible. It would be responsible to be informed and stay informed. But I love the fact that you're pointing out that you can get your information and you can jump on and either watch it or read it or however you find your news, but you don't just absorb it and stay in it and soak in it, right? You just, you get your information
Right.
and you get that break. So good job thinking through how to have a good balance.
That kind of led me to want to ask the three of you, what are some sources? Because some people kind of get stuck, listening to just one source, and which doesn't really, as Jennifer, you just said, doesn't give us the balance. So what are some resources out there, secular as well as Christian, that, are helping the three of you? Any one of you kind of want to just jump out and share some of those? Because this might help someone else too, who is looking for some sources.
I'll say I don't necessarily have any particular like resources that I go to, but I do always try to make sure that I am fact checking all the information, that even if I read it, even if I find an article and I read it, like I want to see that same information somewhere else to confirm it, because I'll have people tell me something, you know, like, oh, did you hear this? And I'm like, huh. And later I'll Google it and it's not right. It's maybe not maliciously wrong. It's just not incorrect. And so I think, especially with social media, you see so many people sharing articles, and sometimes I don't even think they read the articles themselves. They just read the headline and are like, ooh. And so I've definitely, whenever I read something that kind of like grabs my attention or kind of makes me question, then I make sure I go and I find multiple other sources to back up that information. Because, I mean, you'd like to think that places weren't publishing incorrect information, but sometimes it can be skewed.
Yeah, and it's important to remember on that note that sometimes there are places that are just straight up reporting toward an agenda, but sometimes it's just that there's a lot of information and they're reporting one slice of the story. So you're right, Jessica, it's not that it's necessarily wrong in and of itself, but if you don't have the whole picture, you might be, led down a path with a misunderstanding. So
I think kind of along that lines for me, like I do the same thing as Jessica. So like, for instance, and it's always on Facebook, I feel like, where someone shares something and I think you haven't even checked the source. And like, I think like a journalist, but honestly, like the other day I just went to Snopes.com and I'm like, that's going to tell me the basic if this is crazy, if it's not. And honestly, I was a little surprised that it wasn't, but it was just slightly correcting information that told a totally different narrative once the information was slightly corrected. And so another thing that I'll do is like, and honestly, I probably get the worst news on Twitter and then I have to go just investigate it for myself. And I'll just do a Google search and I'll make sure that I'm reading the same article from somewhere that leans left and somewhere that leans right. So that way, because if you're reading both, you can see where they're telling their narrative versus where it's actually something that we should know. And then you can kind of deduce and boil down what I actually need to know from this without the opinion. And so that's helped me a lot just to get a full scope from the media. And I mean, I do the same in my conversations with people, but just knowing that everyone is going to be telling the story the way that they see it, no matter how objective they try to be about it. So getting the diverse opinions from on the same story. And the biggest stories, honestly, everyone's covering it. So you could probably get 27 ideas. So I usually just pick the two biggest and you can probably think of which ones they are. And I read it from those two sites and I'm like, okay, well, here's probably what actually happened.
Somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah. And that's been helpful for me just to get both perspectives, because I don't ever want to just see something from a perspective that I'm inclined to. So.
We are talking about conversations and how to talk about what's happening in the world today in a calm way with factual information. And we have with us, Debbie and I are interviewing some of our TAB team members, Jessica Ingram, Hannah Muñoz, and Myriah Synder. They are sharing with us from a young adult perspective what it's like to try to process all that's happening in the world. I'd like to jump back in now and talk about what it's like to enter a conversation and everyone's already decided exactly what they believe about something or their opinion, and they're very dismissive to any other thought process. What is it like for you as a young adult to try to participate in a conversation like that when you're trying to maybe understand it?
From my point of view, I mean, it's very challenging because so many people have their sides and they're sticking to whatever opinion they want to have. And I think, in some cases, all you can do is just listen and try to understand. Because I don't know that I'm not sure I believe you can have an opinion on something if you don't understand the opposite of your opinion. So, you kind of have to see the whole picture to be able to decide where you stand on something. And I think it is also helpful to have those conversations, just even for like myself, to humanize the person that might be on the opposite side of an issue from me. Because 99% of the people are not trying to be cruel with their intentions or malicious in what they believe, but we tend to, I feel like we tend to view like opposite enemy. And I think we have to get better at just humanizing them and realizing that what they believe is probably because they believe that that's what's best. So then why do they believe that's what's best? And then you can kind of compare it with what you believe and why you believe that's what's best, and have a fuller, I mean, it's kind of like what Myriah was saying earlier, just like you see the full scope of everything. But when you're, up in a conversation with someone who is just defiant and stuck, there really isn't much you can do other than, you just have to be kind and give them grace. And I would say just take that as a learning opportunity to understand their side of it more than trying to necessarily push your side on them.
Yeah, you'll just end up in a big debate, won't you?
And I think along with being kind and giving grace, especially as we're not having a whole lot of in-person conversations, so things like on Facebook or texting or whatever, is to remember how your words may come across if they don't have the inflection of your voice in them. So you may but just be saying a simple statement in disagreement, but it may come off just like you are barreling down on someone, and sometimes it can seem like a really personal attack, whether or not you meant it. It's more, I think, up to you and how you phrase things than it is up to that other person and how they receive it. So yeah, come into a conversation and remember, it's written, you're not getting the inflection in their voice, but as you're writing things, to keep that in mind as well.
I think another kind of just on top of the fact that, kind of parroting what Hannah and Jessica said, that you don't know someone's heart behind it. And so listening is important. And to me, I listen with my face does what it wants. And it's really, really hard if I'm in an in-person conversation to keep what I think unsaid. But sometimes it's important for me because people know where I stand on things. So for me to just not say something and listen to what they're saying, because I have found so many times that I have vehemently disagreed with a friend. And like, I just remember he was writing stuff and I'm like, what is he saying? And then I just sat down and had a conversation with him and I'm like, oh, I mean, you're still wrong, but it almost makes sense. It's kind of what I was wanting to say to him. And so having those conversations and not speaking, because there are so many opinions. No one needs my opinion anymore. Like, someone else already has it and said it more eloquently. So like, let me send you a link to a blog where someone else shared this, but like, you don't need my opinion. It's not original. But listening to other people and letting them feel heard, because especially like, I just remember I was talking to some friends and all three of us were just really, really fired up over something someone said. And we're like, someone needs to listen and figure out what they're actually saying. And so we actually nominated someone to sit down, like, hey, go out with them and figure out what they're saying. So that way we all know what they're saying without everyone getting angry. And the angrier of the three and the people in the group just sat out. So that way someone could listen well. And it's just really a matter of listening well and understanding that there are people behind these opinions. And honestly, I don't think I'm friends with any just really people who hate people. Like, everyone has their opinion and they're coming on, and I've even heard some weird ones coming from a gospel perspective. So understanding that they've thought these through and they just need you to listen to them as a person. So even if it's as simple as picking up a phone and saying like, hey, like, I wanted to hear your voice as you explained this to me because I can't hear it in your blog. Like, and I think that's going to be where we ease some of the tension, is listening to people.
That's good. So it sounds like you guys are saying to give benefit of the doubt before we just make assumptions about if we don't truly understand what they're saying, or can, like you said, the inflections and that kind of thing are not there. Don't read into that. Don't assume and go ahead and decide what we've figured out, but let them have more time to tell us and share. That's good. That's good. Very, very wise thoughts there on how to have those discussions. Do you ever get frustrated though when you want to actually talk it out and someone won't let you?
I do. I'm pretty not necessarily soft-spoken, but I tend to not usually speak my mind. It's just not the type of person that I am. I've always been pretty shy and reserved. And so when I finally decide, you know what, no, this is something that I want to speak on, and someone is shutting me down by dismissing what I'm saying or just not even letting me get a word in, that is just, it's so frustrating. And then it's really hard to come in still with grace and love and not just, no, listen to what I'm saying right now. I'm trying to speak. So
And
that's been tough.
We know at Tab, when Hannah speaks, we all listen because
That's
she.
right.
I think for me, I get frustrated whenever someone assumes that they know what I'm thinking, because sometimes it's just not right. Like, I like to see things, and maybe it's just my personality is contrarian. I like to be like, that's not what I'm thinking at all. And so whenever someone's like, I know what you're going to say about this, and I'm like, but you don't know what I actually am going to say about this. So give me a second to let you know that it is a multifaceted thought that's about to come out. And I think because it's so easy for everything to just be right or wrong, it's just hard to be heard whenever you have a plethora of perspectives in one. And so I think just letting people listen, and I either get fired up or I am like Hannah and I'm quiet. There's no in between for me. So it's hard for me to not go from you're not listening to you are not listening. And so remembering, like, give grace and hope that people give me grace. And I've had a lot of grace from a lot of friends as we've discussed this stuff. And so it's been nice to see that part of people that you disagree with, I think.
Unfortunately, all of this is happening in the middle of a political re-election, or, you know, all of this year is focused on politics.
Right?
Huh?
2020.
I know, 2020, here's the election year. So unfortunately, it's easy to get all of the pandemic, you know, everything rolled into politics. We've kind of discussed that already, but I wanted to ask you all, how do you keep politics out of it? Like, you're having a conversation. Maybe you make a statement or you share your opinion, and immediately you are categorized as either this or this. And it's really above and beyond the political arena. So how do you try to help people see beyond that? Is there any particular thing you try to do?
So I like to do the Sunday school thing, and I make it a gospel issue. So I feel like with everything that's going on right now, like, there is a love your neighbor perspective to all of this. So you can't come at me with politics without me coming at you with a theology behind it. And I just, in my head at least, theology is going to win over that. So that's what I do, is bring Jesus into it. And it seems to be helpful because it at least reprioritizes for most of the people that I'm talking to. And I'm usually talking to believers about it. But for most of the people that I'm talking to, they're not going to argue with me about it being a gospel issue. So it helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important that we see things through scripture and through a biblical lens, because ultimately, you know, the gospel is why we're here. You know, it is God's ultimate purpose for all of our lives, not that we would vote for a president or vote for governor or vote for senator. So I think it's important to keep it in perspective of, like, as believers, what is our actual purpose? What is our mission? And that is just to share the gospel. And sometimes in certain situations that may branch more into the political sphere, but a lot of times it's totally separate from it. It's just, it's just a gospel issue. And we have to be able to see that as primary. instead of anything else, really, whether it's politics, whether it's sports, whether it's, you know, family, friends. The gospel is primary.
All right. Well, this has been so interesting. I don't like that our time is up, but it is. And so we're going to have to wrap this one. I just appreciate you all taking some time to chat with us. You can tell we are social distancing at Tab Media, and it's good to see your faces. But thank y'all for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening. We'll be back with the next Tab Talks next week.